I bought one of those disaster prevention kits. They're pretty popular out there. There's S&S and many of the other ones are making them. You can get them off Amazon. They're all pretty basic. I think the reason they're pretty basic is because they're all about the same. They all do the same thing. And to kind of understand what they're doing, I don't think I've seen a video that kind of tells you why and then shows you how they go on and the different things and maybe the good and the bad of it. The reality is that when you have a CP4, which is on any 6.7 liter and the Duramaxes and the Dodge is the common pump that's used, the reason they're using them is because it really jacks up the pressure. I mean, you go to 36,000 pounds. That's way up from what it used to be. That's why we're able to get these, you know, the Ford 6.7 at 1,025 foot-pounds of torque. It's for that reason. So, what causes it, right? What causes CP4 to fail? I mean, Bosch makes it. They're known to make a pretty good product. If there was a big problem with it, don't you think that it would be like a massive recall? Because 1 million trucks have been built with that thing in there. The problem is, it doesn't happen as often as you think. Now, when it does happen, it's really costly, and it's really costly because of the degree of shrapnel that comes out of the CP4 pump. And behind me here is my truck, and I've been working on installing this disaster prevention kit. The disaster prevention kit, basically what it does is, when the fuel comes out of your fuel tank at low pressure and goes through the water separator, there's a pickup pump in the tank, sends it to the water separator. There's some filtration there, obviously, for water, and there's actually a little screen that goes in there, so you're separating particulates in there. Then it goes forward and goes through your main fuel filter, which sits on top of the engine in the Ford case. And then from there, again, low pressure, it's going into basically the cam chamber of the CP4 filter. The CP4 works like a cam and lifter setup. There's lifters on either side of this big camshaft that's spinning. That camshaft then pushes these lifters up and down, which produce all the pressure. So it's sending the fuel only into the center part of the CP4 filter, fuel pump, which is basically where all this destruction can happen. And the reason the destruction happens is not because the pump is faulty design, but because of what's going into the pump. So if you control better what's going into the pump, you're less likely to have a pump failure. These pumps, there's one guy that went to Dave's Auto in Utah, and this guy had almost 1 million miles on a CP4. I mean, with no problems. He didn't even have a disaster prevention kit on his truck. And so, if we look at this, if we take measures to prevent what causes the problem, which is not changing your water separator, water in the fuel, contaminants in the fuel, not changing your regular fuel filter, and then the fuels that we have in the United States are low sulfur, you have to add back lubricity. So if you get something with very high lubricity, and there's a bunch of them out there, Stanadine makes one, Hot Shot Trucker thing makes one, they all make one. Now, when I did the research on it, the one I found that was the highest level was a company called Excel. They seem to have the highest level of lubricity available. But if you keep the lubricity high, you keep the water to nothing. So what happens is once the fuel has now gone through the back filter, gone through the front filter, and is now inside that CP4 pump and circulating around that, you know, lubricating those two lifters going up and down, it takes some of that liquid that's in there and it lets it go somewhere, which it goes then up into the upper chamber, which is where the high pressure is created. So what these fuel kits do, what they do is they put this block in there where that meter valve goes. They put a block in there, so then no longer can the diesel fuel come from the pump side into the top of the chamber. It's then segregated to that. It can't go any further. And so there's a return that comes out of that for any pressure that's not used by the upper chamber, and that's a return line. And then because this block is in there, the meter still goes in there, But what it's doing is it's metering the fluid coming directly from the fuel filter, the top fuel filter, rather than going through the pump cycle where the camshaft is at. And that's how they preserve. So if you're getting, you know, two filters in the way, the water separator and what it does, and the regular filter, and then they bring that in, and it also passes through the screen before it goes in the high pressure side of the CP4 pump, they can pretty much guarantee that you don't get any metal inside the fuel injectors, which is a big expensive part of when that thing goes bad. One of the tubes that you get creates a teak, so that when the fluid, when the diesel fuel comes out of the filter, the main filter there, it then is split. Part of it goes into the bottom of that CP4 pump, part of it goes to the top of the CP4 pump. On the other end, they give you a screw-in filter, and what that's basically filtering is the fluid, the fuel that's coming from the, let's call it the lifter chamber of the pump, the bottom end of the pump, because it can't go through the top anymore. More fluid's coming out of there. More diesel fuel is just traveling and passing through there and coming out of the pump. So that's headed back to the tank. Then on the top part of it, you have the fluid that's going into the fuel that's going into the top part, which is going to the high pressure side. That's going to the fuel injectors, but remember, the fuel injectors don't use every bit of what heads their way, not all the time, so it has to have a way to bleed that off, and that's headed back to the tank. So when you see on the firewall the screw-in filter, what that's filtering is everything headed back to that's headed back to the pump, and that's what that is basically protecting. When you look at it from a perspective of, if the fuel pump goes bad, you don't have a prevention kit on there. The reason these kits are two-pronged: one, they're preventing contaminants going to the fuel rail, and two, they're preventing contaminants from going back to the tank, which, if it goes back to the tank, it gets in your tank, it gets in your pickup pump, it gets into your water separator system, and basically it gets into all the fuel lines, and that's the more hazardous part. It can get to all the fuel lines. The particles that are going to the tank are probably not even going to make it through this fuel, you know, if they're trying to come back. They probably won't make it through the separator. They definitely won't make it through the fuel pump again. So basically, they get trapped into the back end when that thing begins to go bad. They get trapped into the fuel tank, they get trapped into the fuel pump in the tank, and they get trapped into the fuel lines. So when it goes bad, let's say it all went bad, it spits its guts, you got to fill out the fuel tank, clean it out. You got to get a new pickup pump. They don't give them away. You got to clean out all the fuel lines. That's tough to do. But the big expense really is, you really have to replace the fuel injectors. It's such a small atomization on there that the particles coming out of there can ruin it. If you decide to go that way, understand it will make a difference. It's definitely going to help. It can't hinder. But there's a lot of work to doing it, trust me.